Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third event of the series entitled Off to College with CDN. Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. I'm really excited to kick off this virtual program with all of you. My name is Molly Johannes, and I am the Community Engagement Manager at College Diabetes Network. I've had type 1 diabetes myself for 24 years now, and I definitely could have benefited from what this conversation will be about tonight, which is accommodations in college. But before we jump into that, for those of you who are not aware, the College Diabetes Network is a nonprofit organization that provides peer support, education, and leadership development opportunities for young adults with diabetes. Before I turn it over to our speakers, I want to let everyone know that the chat is open. Please drop any questions that you might have throughout this evening in the chat. We're going to have time towards the end of the event to answer those questions live with our panelists. So today's topic is specifically geared towards accommodations. It's an important topic for students and their parents alike. We notice a lot of conversations in our online communities this time of year, especially as students are receiving college acceptances and making their commitments. I'm now going to hand it off to my colleague, Will Jeanette, who is going to be facilitating our discussion today.
Thanks, Molly. And thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. My name is Will, and I am the Senior Program Coordinator here at College Diabetes Network, which means I have the privilege of working with all of our many campus chapters across the country. In addition, for this specific conversation, I bring experience as a person with type 1 diabetes who navigated accommodations in both undergrad and in grad school, as well as in my undergrad years, co-founding a student health advisory board on my campus to help advise the campus on policy related to our health offices, including the Disability Services Office. So I am very excited to introduce the rest of our incredible panel tonight, starting with Peyton.
Hi, my name is Peyton Dooley, and I'm a second-year student at the University of Chicago. I've had type 1 diabetes since I was 12, so almost 8 years now. And this past fall, I founded a College Diabetes Network chapter on my campus.
All right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ellie. I just finished my third year at Michigan State University studying mechanical engineering. Outside of that, I'm involved with the MSU cycling team. I'm also the president of the MSU chapter of CDN, as well as I've had type 1 for 19 years.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I am a parent of a child that just finished her junior year of college, and she was diagnosed with diabetes when she was 8, so she has had it for 13 years. And I'm also a 504 team chairperson at a local elementary school.
Hi, my name is Isabelle Medina Kaiser, and I am the Director of Disability Services at Wichita State University. This is my third year at Wichita State. And I had been wanting to get a student to start up a chapter of CDN and was able finally to get one. And so I'm a happy person that we're going to have a chapter here.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Before we move on, we do want to just acknowledge that the college searching process, as well as the process of going off to college, is different for everybody. But we would love to get a sense of where everybody is on their journey. So please feel free to comment and let us know where you are in the college process. And if you just committed to a college for this fall, we would love to know where you're going. So our first topic for discussion this evening is diabetes as a disability. We know that many students and young adults with diabetes and people with diabetes in general have a very personal relationship with their disease and with whether or not they choose to identify as someone who has a disability. And we'd like to remain respectful of everybody's sort of personal journey with that throughout this discussion. But in terms of registering for accommodations, regardless of how you feel and you identify, your rights as a person with diabetes are guaranteed by the Americans with Disabilities Act, meaning that all colleges and universities that receive federal funding must provide reasonable accommodations. So this can mean a wide range of things, as we're going to discuss tonight, but ultimately the purpose of registering for accommodations with the Disability Services Office is so that you have tools and support system that you have a right to claim as a person with diabetes if and when you need them. So for our panel, I would love to hear from each of you about why you chose to register for accommodations and when you made that choice, and then who supported you in taking that initiative.
For me, I was diagnosed with type 1 right before I started 7th grade in middle school, and getting accommodations with them was kind of a choice made for me by my parents and my doctor. And it came in handy a few too many times through middle school and high school, to the point where when I was going to college, it was kind of a no-brainer for me that I needed to at least have the same things, if not more, given the change of environment. So I was always supported by my parents and my doctor through that.
Yeah, same. But I've had type 1 since the age of like 3. So I went through all of grade school and now in college with type 1. So I've had accommodations basically my whole life. My parents and my endo office have been very supportive of it. Going into college, I first started looking at it like in the summer. But yeah, I was supported a lot by my parents and my endo office.
Sorry, guys. Kristen, would you like to talk a little bit about your experience of supporting your child through this process?
Sure. So, like I said, I'm a 504 coordinator, so I set up accommodations and whatnot for kids in school, in an elementary school, and I have worked with a few children that have diabetes. But it was, and I've also, been involved with the 504s for my own child. So I went into the college thing thinking, oh, I'm going to go meet with disabilities, and I already know everything there is to know. And there was a lot I didn't know, because I was thinking about how, when you're in elementary school, you're with the nurse, or in a school with a nurse 6 hours a day. College is totally different, but it was nice that they were totally understanding and had a lot of new ideas. And Catherine wasn't the first child to go through school that has diabetes, so they had plenty of ideas that I had never heard of, either in writing plans myself or writing her plans.
Definitely. And Isabelle, we would love to hear about your experience as a disability services coordinator.
Oh, wow. I get to see where the parents are scared as all get up. I could see where the students are like excited, kind of want to push the parents away a little, and are just like, I'm ready to rock. And in the world of accommodations in college, the student is in the driver's seat completely. The parents are definitely there to support, and other people are there to support. But it's so important that the student has transitioned to be prepared for coming into college. And I'll talk about some of that transitioning later.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. And briefly, in my experience, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in February of my senior year in high school, which was too late to get accommodations for AP exams and for other kinds of standardized testing that I had to do here in Virginia. And so I was able to do it without incident, but it was a lot of planning, a lot of thinking, and a lot of knowing I wasn't going to have access to any of my technology, meters, or anything like that for the full duration of the exams. So I immediately knew going into college that I needed not to put myself in that situation again, especially having done it. I took 4 or 5 AP exams my senior year. So I had to do that most of 1 week. And it really threw me off. So I realized then that accommodations can be really helpful. So I was not going to go to college without them.
Yeah.
So referencing what Isabelle had just said, preparing for college takes a lot of checklists and to-dos, and it's really easy to be sort of overwhelmed or set aside the accommodations process as something that you'll get to. And so for our panel, I would love to ask all of you to share, when do you think you should first contact the Office of Disability Services on campus? And tell us what that process was like. What kind of documentation did you need to bring? And sort of how did you navigate that process?
So for me, I thought it would be best to get as big of a head start as possible. So as soon as I knew where I was going, I reached out to Student Disability. The initial reach out did not require anything formal on my end. It was mostly just to schedule an intake appointment, and they were going to tell me the kind of things I would need further down the road. But eventually, I did end up bringing both my 504 plan from high school and middle school, and some letters from my endo.
Yeah, so every university has slightly a different path. But for me personally at MSU, I reached out at the beginning of the summer, like before I even started school, so before my freshman year. And when I reached out originally, they gave me some information on what like I could theoretically want in the future. So some ideas of accommodations. And then I had a meeting with them before school started, just to talk about like I had to bring a letter from my endo, I had to bring my 504, like stuff like that. And then they were they were super helpful. So like very easy to work with. They even like suggested some accommodations that I personally didn't even think that I would need, that are super useful now. So yeah.
So when my daughter finally made her decision, I contacted Disability Services right away and set up an appointment to go in to see them, and brought her 504 information from her doctor. She also has celiac disease, so that was another big thing. I'm sure there has to be somebody out there listening that also is dealing with that as well. So we had to kind of deal with both issues at once, but they were very accommodating, and they still are to this day. Last week she had finals, and there was a little blip in the whole finals process, and they just followed her plan, and they were wonderful. So just talk, and the sooner you get in there, the better.
Thank you for sharing. And Isabelle, we'd love to hear from you again on this topic of
Certainly.
when should people reach out?
Well, first and foremost, the whole process is interactive, and so really get in there early. And accommodations are going to be varied, depend on how your T1D affects you. So definitely be prepared to talk about how your diabetes affects your life academically, and more importantly, get in there early, because if you're needing housing accommodations, you need to get in there early because housing's probably already been picked by now. And so you want to get in there and make sure that and that you take care of that. People don't think about the housing concern that might be kicking up. Let's say you're needing a single room because you don't want your alarm to be going off and waking your neighbor all the time, if you have a monitor, or maybe you're needing a private bathroom, or maybe you're wanting a private room but you want to share a common area. So that's get in there early. I actually suggest to come in like your junior year, just get to meet the university, get to meet the people at the disability services, and listen to your gut. If they're, welcoming, then good. If they're seeming that they're not so welcoming, you need to talk to people.
That's a great insight, and I know we'll have some personal stories on that front here in a minute. For me, I reached out to my disability services office in the summer before I came to school, and because my diagnosis was so recent, I didn't really even have a 504 at that point. I had to bring a little bit of extra documentation, but they were super helpful, and they gave me a lot of, like you all said, a lot of accommodations I didn't even know I needed that ended up being the ones I used the most, and the ones I went in there to specifically ask for, I probably never touched. So definitely be open to the expertise of the people who arrange these kinds of accommodations, but you have to find a good balance between trusting their expertise and also going with your gut and knowing what's best for you. It's really a partnership in that way. And I would love to spend just a second talking about that transition from K through 12 in college, because like we've all alluded to, it's a very different scenario. So a lot of people probably have 504 plans or other accommodations in high school if they're bringing diabetes with them. And one of the important things to remember about college accommodations is that the student must request the services at the college directly. Parents are not allowed to be involved in that process until the student grants them permission to be. So this is a really student-driven process, and it's an excellent opportunity for parents to sort of continue to support and be like a sounding board and even come to the appointments. But it's a really good opportunity for students to sort of start taking real ownership of that situation. So for our panelists, I would love to ask, in your personal experience, what are the major differences you experienced between accommodations in high school versus in college?
For me, the biggest difference, I mean, everyone's going to say something along these lines, but the biggest difference is how student driven it is. I know I went to events like this when I was in high school, and I heard people tell me that, and I listened to them and was still kind of shocked. I know at my school, I'm not sure if this is the case everywhere, but for each exam that I take, I have to put in a request and schedule the exam through student disability, which was not my experience in high school at all. I think also the professors are more detached from teachers in high school to the student. So you have to be a little better at communicating at times to make sure that they understand what's going on and they're informed of your accommodations, which in high school was, I feel, more run behind the scenes without me having to be a part of it.
Yeah, for me personally, I felt like the difference between like grade school and high school and then to like college was like when I was younger, like for me personally, my diabetes was more of like we worked as a team with my parents. So like they were very involved throughout my life. And then it got to college and it was like, you're by yourself. Like, and it was like my first time like ever being like completely by myself. Like I was of course like independent in high school, but like this is the first time you're like completely by yourself. Like my parents didn't do anything. They actually couldn't do anything. So it was definitely a learning curve for sure the first time around. But like every year for me personally, I have to renew my visa in accommodations. So like each year the process gets easier and easier and you'll get it eventually.
I think for me as the parent, biggest difference was the security of in high school and elementary school all the way up to high school was having the school nurse right down the hall. And she was there all day long compared to in college, the school nurse isn't there all day long and she's not right down the hall. So you just have to figure out the channels that you need to go through should there be an emergency. So I'd like checked in to see, get the details of security and the RAs and different things like that. You have to kind of reach out and see who is going to be your point of contact because the nurse isn't always going to be there like they were up until either your senior year in high school.
Definitely. Isabelle, would you like to discuss a little bit about some of the things that you see people being surprised by?
I think it's, again, the fact that the student has to be in the driver's seat completely. I think that it's a new thing for them. And, again, the transition can be kind of difficult, which is the other reason I wanted us to have a charter, because who else is best to talk to another student? And so that way they can kind of say, hey, this is what I went through when I went through accommodations, or this is what I have that kind of happened. I see my job, I become kind of the mother. I'm not a mother, but I become kind of the mother. I really want to encourage our students to advocate for themselves. But if they're running into a wall, guess who comes in? And I've told people this before. I used to be a probation officer, and so my voice dropped about 5, octaves down, because I am passionate to make sure that our students are getting accommodations. And it's important for them to have a voice for them. I want them to get their own voice because eventually you're going to have to need or want accommodations in the workplace. And so you need to learn how to verbalize what you need. And I think that's the most important thing is learning how to communicate with your professors, not being afraid of them. You're the client, okay? And, figuring out how to do emails. For a lot of students, it's like, oh my God, how do I call this person, hey dude? Do I call this person professor such and such? How do you kind of provide that? And if students are interested, we have different little templates that we use for our students that struggle with that, just so that they can go, boom, that way you can get this information out to your professors. It needs to be professional, but it also needs to be you advocating for yourself, but not too intense either. It's interesting line, but there are definitely templates out there that will help. And just knowing your diabetes and being able to verbalize that and how that's going to affect academics, how it's going to affect housing, whatever issues, because even though it sucks, it does affect all of those things.
Definitely. I would say for me, the biggest thing that I noticed was actually geography, because in a high school or in grade school, you're pretty much in one building. And at college, you're walking around a lot, and you're walking to class, or you're running to class if you're late. And people with diabetes, we know when you go on a quick walk, sometimes that does as much as a real workout, and your blood sugar will start to crash, and you just started class. And so you have to get used to a lot of that stuff. And that's why one of my major accommodations that I used a lot, and I know we'll talk about more specific examples later, was flexibility in attendance. So that if I needed to stay outside of the classroom for a second and treat a low or kind of get it together before I went in without distracting all my fellow students, I had access to that ability.
Yeah, we actually have, we used to have a little golf cart, now we have a van for some of our students with medical issues, so that, we could drive them from class to class. And then the other accommodation, I'm just going to say this once because I know we're going to talk about accommodations, but being able to register priority registration. A lot of people don't realize that's an option for some of our students, so that they can look at their class schedule and go, I know my blood sugars drop in the morning, or I know they go up high at such and such. When is the best time to take your class and to work with that? So that's another accommodation I would push.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good one. A lot of people don't realize that the benefit that can have. And as you get more seniority in the classes at school, you'll realize how having a nice schedule for seniors tends to happen. It's because you register first. But as a freshman, especially for after your first semester, you're going to be registering dead last. And you're going to have 7:20 to 10 p.m. classes 2 days a week. And it's just going to be a mess. So that priority registration can be so good. And that's actually a perfect segue into talking about some examples of accommodations. So I would love to hear about sort of the top accommodations that you all registered for that you feel have been the most helpful and important to you as a student.
For me, the top two for me have been the two that have already been stated. Attendance flexibility has been absolutely huge for me. At my school, we have a lot of small discussion-based classes where attendance is a huge part of your grade. And we also have some short turnarounds between classes. Like I'll have 10 minutes and a mile sometimes to walk. And if I'm low, I'm not making that. So that has been incredibly important for me. Priority registration as well, because a lot of the classes that I have to take have inconvenient times, and they have maybe one section out of convenient time. And it's really important that I get in there so that I can have my meals organized and at good times of the day. I didn't know I could have that until this quarter, so I made it almost halfway through college without it. And I had times where I went from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. with only like 2 or 3 10-minute breaks in there, which is just awful for eating and was never the case in high school. So having those two are just huge for me. And I never knew that they were options or even possible.
Yeah, so my top accommodation is probably to be able to, when I'm taking exams, have my meter, have glucose tabs, have water, and I can have that on my desk, because some professors I found out freshman year are kind of picky on what you can have on your desk and what you can't. So that was an accommodation I added on after my first semester because I learned those kind of things. But that's probably the top accommodation for me. But as it said before, scheduling before everyone else does has been very helpful for me personally, because like having those times to eat meals during the day, so you're not going from like 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. is really nice.
Just to add on to the preferred scheduling, which was one of the things that was new, for us when we first went for Catherine's freshman year. Besides being able to pick and choose and make sure you have classes that you have a little bit of a break so you can have lunch or whatever, they also recommended classes that started a little bit later in the day rather than the 8 o'clock class, in case she was up during the night. With a high or a low, they wanted to make sure she did get some sleep in the morning. So she never really had any classes before 10 o'clock. And then they gave her a break, a class. So that worked out well. And one other thing that she had in high school, which carried over to college, but I'm surprised at some people that don't have this accommodation, was that not to take a test if her blood sugar was out of range. So when I mention that to people now for writing a 504, they say, why does that need to be in there? So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware, if you're not, that no matter what age your child is, they shouldn't be taking any kind of tests or anything if their blood sugar is out of range.
Isabelle, I know you already kind of mentioned one that we've all touched on as being very critical, but I would love to hear maybe a couple of other examples of stuff that you think maybe people don't think of.
Well, I would definitely say extended time on test, because even if your blood is doing okay, maybe the day before it wasn't, and you may have the little brain fog that kicks up. So extended time on testing would be definitely one that I would suggest. I'd also suggest extended time on assignments. The most that you could get is maybe 24 to 48 hours, again, depending on the episode of low or high sugars. That might be a good one to also ask for. I think that Ellie already talked about making sure that you could have the monitor to be able to check the monitor. A lot of professors think, oh my God, this person's looking at their phone a hell of a lot. And then you realize it's because the person's checking their blood. So making sure that there's not going to be a problem with having the cell phone. Water and snacks to be able to get the sugars to come back up and to stay hydrated is very important. I already talked about priority enrollment. Reasonable absences. Again, I think that Peyton just talked about that, how that's important, and having that conversation with the professor about absences and just saying, okay, I may have to miss some. What ways can I make up for that class? Is it something, and it shouldn't be anything that penalizes you, but it should be something like, okay, I just wanted the class was to do this. Can I do it on Zoom? Can I, find different alternatives to still meet the class requirements, but still to be able to have that time to take care of yourself. And self-care is the biggie. Again, communicating with your professor, especially if there's going to be an issue of you passing out. Your professor's already going to have your accommodation letter. What do they do in an emergency? What do they not do in an emergency? Because again, just, talking to them about that. Making sure you contact food services to make sure that you get the right diet, food plan. Making sure that it's not going to be a problem to bring something in like a microwave to warm up food in your dorm. So just some of those things that we don't think about as far as accommodations.
Those are really good examples. I was about to mention food. Dining works differently everywhere, but if you don't have access to 24-hour dining or meals that take place during normal meal times, you need to make sure that you have stuff in your room. But I have had friends who have ended up requesting housing accommodations to have access to a kitchen so they could make their own food, because, and that would be a good one for people who have celiac too, potentially. if you're worried about the cross-contamination or that kind of stuff, because even though they may have gluten-free stuff, they're probably, probably using the same spatulas or whatever. And like, this is something that doesn't apply everywhere, but if you're going to an older school, I live in Virginia, a lot of our state schools are very old and not all the dorms have air conditioning. And if you're going to need some normal climate, because we all know like weather can, and heat especially, can really impact your insulin sensitivity, that is something that you could ask for. But again, you're going to want to do that as early as you can, because housing is going to be assigned pretty quickly. So I think
I had a student who brought a fan into the class. We had to make sure that we could plug it in so that they stayed cold.
Yeah. So I think the way I would maybe summarize it from my experience working with the Disability Services Office on sort of policy stuff is there are endless ways to be creative, but they all stem from a need. So if you can articulate your need, then you can come up with a solution that's going to work for you. And that's going to be a collaborative process. It's going to look different for each person. It's going to look different at each campus. But the key is that you need to know how to articulate what the underlying need that you have is, so that you can work with the school to address that need. And like I said, those are going to be different for everybody. So I would love to talk a little bit about, students have looked it up, they've had their meeting, they've talked to Disability Services, they're carrying their little letters. Now what? The rubber hits the road, and you've got to communicate about that, right? Your professors need to be handed a letter and need to be told what those accommodations look like. You've got all kinds of stuff that you've got to orchestrate. So I would love if our panelists could talk about how do you talk to your professors, TAs, roommates, etc., and see if you can give us a real life example of accommodations that you've used and how you had to communicate them.
So for me, the way it works at University of Chicago is that you request your accommodations for each class at the beginning of each quarter, which is sort of like an automated email that goes to the professors. It'll say Peyton Dooley is eligible for breaks as needed on exams. They can check their medical devices during exams. They can eat, attendance flexibility, that kind of stuff. And I had initially just left it at that. I send that request out. I send out my request for exams. And that worked for about half of one quarter. And so I had this miscommunication with the professor about my exam accommodation because the official wording said breaks as needed during exams. The professor interpreted that as not including quizzes. And so it was kind of in that moment that I realized I needed to do a little bit more than what had just been sent out automatically. That took about a week of back and forth emails before I was able to secure my accommodations. And since then, at the beginning of each new quarter, what I've realized is the best for me, and I have not hit any problems since, is after sending out that automated letter, I sort of send the email, I copy on the TAs, any other professors that might change during the quarter, and I sort of walk them through the accommodations and explain the need behind them. The reason for the first miscommunication was that my professor didn't think that my breaks would be eligible during a quiz because the time was shorter, and they thought that the breaks were for fatigue, not for a potential low blood sugar. So after explaining that, they understood and there was no more problems. So that's been the biggest thing for me, is sending out an email sort of explaining why I have these accommodations, because these are professors who probably aren't living with the disease that we all are. And that's been the biggest help for me.
So for me, the biggest thing was probably like talking to the professors, like going up to them at the very beginning of the semester to like, as soon as I have an email from like their class website or a syllabus or anything, I send an email right away. At Michigan State, we all get letters. They're called visas with listing our accommodations. And so every semester I send them out. And then at the end of every class, like the first class, I'll go up to the professor and like meet them like personally in person, or on Zoom if it's an online class. But I will always have that time to have like that one-on-one time just for them to like associate a name with a face, as well as just like get to know you and you can explain a little bit more in person. I just found it just works a lot better that way. For roommates, I went in completely random with a roommate my freshman year. I went in blind, didn't know this girl until I moved in. We had each other's name, like we got each other's info about 2 weeks beforehand. But I was studying abroad, she was studying abroad, so we didn't have communication until we met the day of and we moved in. I made the mistake of not telling her at first. So the first night I actually went low. My phone was going off, and the next morning we woke up and she was like, just to let you know, your phone was going off like all night. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I explained everything right then. But I would just tell him at the beginning. I mean, she's one of my best friends to this day, and she will help me with literally anything. She loves putting my Dexcoms in. It just fascinates her. So, and she doesn't have a fear of needles or anything. So it worked out in my favor, but I wouldn't be afraid to have that conversation with your roommates even before you move in or right when you move in. I would just have that conversation so that they knew. I always explained like what to do if I was having a low at night. She would always make sure I was up if she woke up. Also, I talked to the RA. So the RA knew what was going on. So if my roommate had to go get the RA and I was unresponsive, what does the RA do? And like all that stuff, and how to use glucagon. So I did training for them. So like they knew exactly what to do if an event were to happen.
So as far as letting professors know, my daughter doesn't hesitate to tell anyone what her needs are. I mean, ever since she was diagnosed, she carried that pump right on her hip. She wasn't embarrassed to show it or anything. So she told everyone up front. Some of them said, oh, I have someone in my family. Some said, I don't know anything about it, but let me know how I can help. So all her teachers were very supportive. As far as roommates, I know that when she finally decided where she was going to go, they had like this Facebook page of all, incoming freshmen or whatever, and they started talking, and they picked roommates through that. And then she said, should I tell? And I said, yeah, go ahead and tell, because, maybe this roommate that you think you're going to room with knows someone that already has diabetes. So that would be comforting for you, and you won't have to teach them everything. I said, maybe a roommate will say, no way, I don't want any part of that. You'd rather find out now. So as I said, she just finished her junior year, and she lives off campus. She's lived off campus since after her freshman year, and her roommates all follow her Dexcom. They call her even when she's home and say, hey, we're getting an alert. And one thing I think that was helpful once she moved off campus, when she was on campus, I had the roommate's phone number, all that stuff. But when she moved off campus, I got her an Alexa. So if I'm getting alerts and she's not responding to the alert, she's not responding to my texts, my phone calls, I just drop in and start yelling at her. So I haven't had to use that other than just to drop in and bother her. But there's never been an emergency situation where I've had to use it, but it gives me a little peace of mind. So that was something I didn't know before going in. And it was just almost like a fun little tip.
I would add making sure that you connect with the University Police Department. So when things might kick up, they can connect with you, know where you're what they're supposed to do, who they're supposed to contact. Make sure you put an emergency contact information on your cell phone. If you don't like wearing the bracelets, wear the necklace that has that information on there. And I think the most important part, and Peyton kind of touched on this, is that, you're having to do this every semester as far as accommodations. Just making sure you get that done, because we can't go, it's not retroactive. We can't go backwards and fix things. We can go forwards where we're at, but we can't go backwards. So it's really important to put that on your calendar to remind you to do it. We send out emails almost every week to remind people. We've also started texting because I know that might be a better way to connect with students. And so again, just making sure that you're following through with that part.
Definitely a really good point. It's really important to remember your accommodations do not work until you've told your professor you have them, and they will not work retroactively. I had a friend who tried to sort of retroactively use accommodations because they were late to a lab and the professor locks the door at the start of the lab, and there was nothing that they could do, and they had the accommodations, but they just never bothered to hand them the letter. So it's really important that you have that conversation. And I want to highlight that for people who may not be as sort of open about discussing their diabetes, it's not required for you to inform the professor what your disability is, but it is required that you tell them you have accommodations for disability. So if you don't want to talk about diabetes, that's fine, but you do have to bring up the topic and let them know. However, your university has set that process up, because until they know about the accommodations, they can't do anything about it. So that's just something I like to remind people, is you would always rather give them the letter and talk to them about diabetes on day one and never bring it up again because you didn't need to, than realize when you're standing outside of a locked lab door that you should maybe have done that before. So for those who are diagnosed at a young age, we know parents and families often really share a lot of the load of diabetes management, especially in younger years, and changing those dynamics has a lot of feelings and a lot of tension as young adults sort of develop their independence. So I would love to hear from all of our panelists what suggestions you have for families who are in this phase of transitioning independence. What would you tell parents of students with T1D to be preparing right now while their kids are still juniors and seniors preparing for college? And for our college students on the panel, maybe talk a little bit about like what kind of boundaries and guidelines you and your parents set up that help make that work for you.
So since I was diagnosed when I was 12, this isn't as huge as it is for especially those who are diagnosed as toddlers when they really could do nothing to control their diabetes. But it still was a pretty big deal. My mom's a doctor, so she likes to be very on top of me about my diabetes. And the things that we used to have trouble with, I did not like when she followed my Dexcom, because she would bother me anytime I wasn't exactly 120, which is all the time, especially as a teenager. So we kind of started small. When I was a junior and a senior in high school, told her I didn't want her to follow me when I was in college. I knew that from just, I play tennis, and when I would be away, I did not like how frequent, it was more frequent that she was communicating with me. So we kind of set that up that was not going to be the case in college. She was not going to have my sugar. So we would do little practice weeks sometimes, stuff like that, or with my prescriptions. By my senior year, she had kind of handed them off to me to reschedule. But she was on top of it, so that way she could tell that I was on top of it. Still, by the time I was in college, she could trust me to handle that on my own. But I think the most important thing is just to have some honest conversations about how you feel, because I remember when I was 15, I couldn't understand why my mom wouldn't leave me alone about my blood sugars, and I get it a little bit more, the further it's been since then. But if you're not going to have those conversations, it's going to be really hard to do it right, and come to an understanding. I know my mom was very hesitant to let me not share my sugars with her, but she helped me set up backups that she felt comfortable with. Like the RA will have my sugars, and if I'm below a certain point, the RA will contact my mom. Things like that. So the most important thing is to just be honest and to communicate, and figure out what works for each of you.
I think the hardest thing is probably the parents' ability to let go a little. I know personally, my parents actually still follow me on Dexcom. I allow them. They do not have alerts. Like if I go high, they do have alerts if I go urgent low, so they can contact me. But they can still follow me. I just don't they don't have alerts, so they can't text me every 24 hours. But I also outside of that, I do let like most of my friends follow me as well. I know my roommates who I share an apartment with. They majority of them have my Dexcom readings. But just to have like your parents not like watching your blood sugars like 24/7 is really nice, because mistakes will happen. You'll learn like as you go. It's a giant learning curve. Like I remember freshman year, like it's a giant learning curve. You will make mistakes, but you also will learn from them so you don't repeat them again. So that's the biggest thing. And if you have a parent that's like watching your blood sugar and you're like, why is your blood sugar high? And you're like, well, I forgot a charging cord for my pump and my pump's currently dead. It's just like stuff like that. Like you don't want to like, you don't want to like have to explain that to them later and stuff. And then like your whole conversations about diabetes, and they just want to know what's happening in your life outside of diabetes, because like college is one of the best experiences.
I'm going to jump on that with the following the Dexcom. I do still follow my daughter. And as hard as it was, I have to bite my tongue and say, don't call her. Their numbers are out of range. Don't call her. Leave her alone. She'll figure it out. So the high ones, I wouldn't bother her unless I could see it pushing. And then I might send her a text just like, yo, and she'll write back, yep, I have insulin on board. So I would know, okay, that's it. But I don't want to haunt her with it. But when she was a freshman, I kind of liked it because if I could see it moving or spiking at a certain time, I'd be like, oh, she's probably at dinner now. So I kind of felt like I knew what she was doing, even though she wasn't home. But I didn't haunt her. And then before she left, I was following her, and I started to not even bother her when she was going low, even though she was home. I wanted to see if she would catch it on her own. So it was kind of like a trial type thing. And it worked. And still, even to this day, I don't really bother her for the highs unless at night and it's keeping me awake. And it's just mostly the lows that I have to use it for. But for the most part, she handles everything on her own, so it's fine. I think it was more me than it was her. It was a self-control thing, or a control thing, I should say. I just had to teach myself to cut back, like it is on everything.
Yeah, Isabelle, do you want to share?
Sure. I would say to parents, just prepare your student to be ready for this transition. Have them attend the IEP 504 meetings and participate, so that when in the future they have to explain their issues, they can articulate it. Have the students start setting up doctor appointments, making sure that they're the ones that are going to figure out how to pick up the medication and what is the plan to get the meds. Especially if it's a snowy area and roads are closed up, what's the game plan? Teach them how to cook simple items that they can do in their dorm, or teach them how to buy some of the right foods, and how to do it on a budget is always a biggie, because those the noodles that a lot of our college is not really good for you, but they're tasty. The only thing I would also add is just make sure you pick your roommates really well, because sleep and rest is so important. I had seen a stat that came up the other day, and it said that college students got on the average 4 hours of sleep at night. Not good. Some of it's just because, again, you're trying to study or you're hanging out with your buddies. I get that. Maybe just having the student work on how to get on bed on time. Time management is the most important thing, and for any student it is. But if you're dealing with any type of a medical issue, even more so, because you got so many more things that you have to do.
Definitely. And this for me has been like a passion area of mine of helping. I've done a lot of off to college events over the many years I've been with CDN, and I always like to talk about this sort of transition to independence and specifically boundaries around Dexcom follow. I cannot stress enough that you have to communicate and find a way to satisfy the needs of both the student and the parent. And you can believe me, I have a master's degree in conflict resolution. So I'm telling you, you've got to communicate, because the needs are really the same. Like both of the people involved need to feel safe, and they need to feel that the other person trusts them. And so if you, as a parent, are texting me because you see my blood sugar going up at 2 p.m. and it's because I got a late lunch and I'm eating pasta because I'm a college student and my life is in chaos, I'm going to lose it, because you have a lot of information and you have no context. So acting on information without context is a really good way to create conflict. At the same time, recognizing that the reason my parents might be following my Dexcom is so that they know I'm safe, and that's a need that they have. And so finding a good balance for me, because I was diagnosed at 18, everything was on me from the start, like legally and personally. Like there was no option for my mom to be involved in a lot of it. And so we came up with a way that I would give her the login information to my Dexcom Clarity so she can see my trends. She doesn't know what my day-to-day numbers look like, but she knows what I looked like last week. And if she sees that it's getting really out of control, she can reach out and say, hey, just noticed things are a little crazy. Can I help? Like, is there something I can do? Like, let me know how to help you. But, trying to stay as communicative as possible is really hard. So I want to acknowledge that, but I want to say that communicating and being really honest is the most critical thing you can do. And starting early. You do not want to start these conversations halfway through freshman year when I'm tempted to block your phone number because you keep calling me about my pasta. I want to have this conversation so that when I leave for college, I feel like you trust me to take care of myself. And I feel like I know you're there to help me if I need you. So that's all I'll say on the matter. Communicate. I know we have a lot of really good questions coming in on the chat. And so I want to make sure that we have time to address some of those. So if we can pop up some of those questions for our panelists, that'd be awesome. All right. What do you suggest having in a 504 to make it easy to get accommodations in college? This is a really good question. Maybe, Kristen, do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Sure. I think that, as we've all said, it's two totally different situations. I don't think that anything that's in the 504 will work for you or against you when you're in college. It's a whole new ball game, so you're going to have to come up with a whole new plan. So if your child's diagnosed when they're in second grade, don't be worrying all the way through 12th grade that, if that's not in my 504, I'm not going to get it in college. Just take it year to year, grade to grade, and you should be all set.
Isabelle, would you agree with that?
I would suggest the more documentation that we have, the better. 504s are sometimes very sketchy. IAPs tell me a heck of a lot more, but I also know that sometimes you get staffed out of those, and I usually suggest not to get staffed out of them because it would be nice to have the IAP to make sure that we're not missing something, because sometimes we focus just on the one issue, and then we find out the student also has dyslexia, has celiac, has, all these other different things. And so we miss the full picture of it. Having a documentation from the physician about how it's currently affecting the student, so that we know what we're working with, to make sure that, again, communication's kicking up there.
And one thing I would say, for the younger kids, have extended time or breaks, I should say, in the 504, because when it comes time for the SATs or something like that, there has to be a record of the extended time in your 504. You can't just decide senior year, I need extra time. They won't give it to you. So make sure that's in there for a few years before the testing starts to take place.
That's a really good tip. That might have helped me with my AP exam fiasco. All right. Any thoughts on rooming alone, maybe with a common room or with a roommate for safety versus disruption? I think this we've touched on a little bit, but Peyton and Ellie, do you want to share kind of how you approached that?
Yeah, so actually, my first year, I did not have a roommate. I had a single. And this year, I live in like an apartment style room. So I have my own space, and then we have a shared like kitchen living room area. And that has worked really well for me. I know at my school, the buildings are really old and the walls are really thin. So there was never a worry about if I'm not waking up my alarm that no one will hear it. Um, I also, when I was alone last year, had shared my Dexcom with my RA and my RHs, which maybe not every school has, but they're like adults who work in the dorm and their job is to take care of the students, basically around the clock. So that was really easy then. This year with my apartment, I have a roommate who goes to bed probably from 5 to 6 a.m. and I have a roommate that wakes up at 5 to 6 a.m. So there's always someone awake in the
You have around the clock coverage.
yeah, my blood sugars, and it's happened a couple times. They joke about it. They said they feel like my mom, because it'll be 3 a.m. and she'll be studying and she'll knock on my door and say that I need a juice box. So that has worked out pretty well for me. I know people sometimes feel more safe in a double, someone in the same room, but it can definitely work without that.
Yeah, so as I said before, I've had a roommate my freshman year, and I live in an apartment now with 3 other girls. So my freshman year, I felt pretty like safe, like living with another person. I didn't know her before the day I moved in, so yeah, I was a little nervous. I'm like, I should have hit like that topic right away, but like I was like, I don't want it to be like the first thing she knew about me, because like we're all bigger than just being type 1, so like I didn't want to have that be the first thing out of the gate, but like it is very important. My roommate Sophie, my freshman year, was very supportive. She was completely understanding. She loved. I would always have like white Dexcom stickers to like put on, so like it looked a little bit like cooler in my opinion. And she would always color them for me because she loved. She was like an artist and stuff. So like it was like ways like that we could like almost like bond. But she also loved like just knowing like explaining like what does a pump site do, what does a pump do, or like what is a Dexcom, how do you put in that Dexcom site, and like the supplies. Like I would always just keep them in my like side of the room, and then I always took the like fridge, and I had the fridge door, and I always had apple juice, and like my insulin was there in the fridge, so like stuff like that. Like it was very easy to get along with another person since she was like very understanding. So I loved it. When I went low at night, we had a system that she would throw pillows at me until I woke up.
Me too.
So that way she didn't have to get out of bed. I didn't have to get out of bed. It just worked out amazingly. And I always just kept glucose tabs on like, I put a little shelf on my loft bed and I just put glucose tabs there. So like it worked out. But yeah, that's what I did. I loved living with another person. It's a great way to meet people on campus.
That's a really good point. And I think in terms of disruption, I think, once you have a good conversation with somebody and they understand that the beeping means that you're in medical distress, anyone with any decent person is going to be patient with that. And if they're not, it's probably not who you need to be living with anyway. Is a copy of class notes a reasonable accommodation? Oh, that's a really good question. Isabelle, do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Certainly. And yes, it's a definite reasonable accommodation. However, I would really strongly suggest, and I'm not a person that owns these pens, it's called the Smart Pen, Echo Smart Pen. It actually records what you're listening to in the class, but also records what you're writing. So let's say you have to step out of the room to go to the bathroom or do something as far as food is concerned, it will still record, because getting notes can be very hard to find.
Yeah.
And so I really am pushing assistive technology that's going to help our students, not just now, but in the future.
That's a really good point. I think it's also the technology is a lot more reliable. If you're asking for accommodation from class notes, someone has to take those notes. And so it's a higher lift on the school or one of your classmates, and you're only going to get what that person catches. So technology is a much more surefire way to get around that issue, for sure. It looks like we're coming right up to the hour here, so I think that that's all the questions we have time for tonight. But I want to thank our panelists so very much and hand it over to Molly.
All right, join me in thanking Ellie, Peyton, Kristen, Isabelle, and Will for their time and wisdom today. I know that I learned a lot from this panel. It's really great to see the engagement in the chat as well. We also want to thank our sponsors of our Spring Off to College series, and that includes Dexcom, Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Viatris. We do want to share a few additional resources for you from CDN. We'll be including a recap of today's topics and resources in a follow-up email, but also want to highlight a few right now. First, a reminder to check out the final event in this series, all about transitioning to the next chapter, preparing for move-in day. We have a Campus Advocates and CDN Reach program that we'd also like you to know about. Campus Advocates are college faculty and staff who are interested in supporting and advocating for students with diabetes and CDN chapters. As students gain allies on campus, professors, advisors, someone in disability services, call upon them to be a campus advocate like Isabelle. You can learn more about that on our website. Second, we have 2 Off to College resource guides available to download from our website that are super helpful and very thorough, one geared towards students and one for our caregivers. And speaking of caregivers, if you haven't already, you're welcome to join our active and private Facebook group, Parents of the College Diabetes Network. Young adults, I would strongly urge you to consider joining or starting a CDN chapter at your college when you arrive. We're happy to help you identify schools that have active chapters and or connect you with a current chapter member while you're in your college search process. You just have to email us at chapters@collegediabetesnetwork.org. And finally, you can stay up to date with everything related to CDN by joining our email newsletter and connect with us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Thank you all and have a great evening.